Good evening and welcome. Tonight we are going to be continuing our read through of this book called On This Day, A History of the World in 366 Days. And we are going to be exploring the month of September. So if you have a September birthday, let me know down in the comments what your favorite event that happened on your birthday is. So let's just dive right in. Starting with September 1st, 1939, the Great Evacuation. Days before Britain entered World War II, millions of people, mostly children, began to be evacuated from British towns and cities to the countryside to save them from anticipated German bombings. In 2008, Spring Temple Buddha. After more than 10 years of construction, the Spring Temple Buddha was completed in Hainan, China, with a height of 420 feet. Nice. It was the tallest statue in the world until 2018. In 1946, Turin Race, a Grand Prix motor race held in Turin, Italy, was the first to follow a new set of rules that would later define Formula One or F1 racing. Also on this day in 1939, Germany invaded Poland. This act prompted Britain and France to declare war against Germany, starting World War II. In 1941, in Nazi-occupied Europe, Jews were ordered to identify themselves by wearing a yellow star-shaped badge on their clothes. And in 1985, the wreckage of the RMS Titanic was found at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. And born this day in 1996 is Zendaya, U.S. actor. She became a famous Disney star before playing Michelle Jones, or MJ, in the Spider-Man series. Next we have September 2nd, 1942, a flying tank. The Soviet Union claimed to have carried out the first test flight of a flying tank called the Antonov A-40. Designers hoped that it could be dropped from an aircraft and glide down onto the battlefield. There it goes. 2015, space toys. The first Danish astronaut to go to space, Andreas Mogensen, took 20 Lego figurines to the International Space Station to be awarded as a competition prize to school children at the end of his mission. That's cool. And in 31 BCE was the Battle of Actium. In a naval battle off the coast of Actium, Greece, Roman leader Octavian defeated the joint forces of his rival Mark Antony and Queen Cleopatra of Egypt. Renaming himself Augustus, he soon took charge of the Roman Empire. Also on this day in 1666, the Great Fire of London began at a bakery. It destroyed most of the city before it was put out. 1945, Vietnam declared its freedom from French colonial rule after defeating the occupying Japanese forces at the end of World War II. And in 2013, U.S. swimmer Diana Nyad became the first person to cross the shark-infested waters between Cuba and Florida without a shark cage for protection. Born this day, in 1948, Krista McAuliffe, U.S. teacher and astronaut. She was the first teacher chosen to travel to space, but died when the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded after takeoff. And in 1964, Keanu Reeves, Canadian actor. He rose to fame with starring roles in films such as Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Speed, and The Matrix. Is that really Keanu Reeves' birthday, though? Like, is he really that old? Anyway, next we have September 3rd, 1838, Escape to Freedom. Frederick Douglass, an enslaved black man, escaped from a plantation in Maryland and made his way to freedom, traveling by train and boat to New York City. He became an important figure in the anti-slavery movement. 1967 Swedish Switch. At 4:50 a.m., drivers in Sweden switched from driving on the left-hand side of the road to the right-hand side. This switch was followed by the massive task of changing road signs, traffic signals, street lights, and intersections across the country. And in 1935, a record-breaking drive. At the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah, British racing driver Malcolm Campbell became the first person to hit the land speed milestone of 300 miles an hour when he reached a top speed of 301 miles per hour in his custom-built car, the Campbell Railton Bluebird. Also on this day, in 301 CE, the world's oldest republic, the small nation of San Marino, was founded by Saint Marinus. In 1260, the Mongol Empire was defeated in the Battle of Ain Jalut in Western Asia by the Mamluk dynasty of Egypt. And in 1939, Britain and France declared war on Nazi Germany, officially kick-starting World War II after Adolf Hitler invaded Poland. Born this day, in 1875, Ferdinand Porsche, Austrian-German automobile engineer. He founded the car company Porsche. And in 2010, how is that a tongue twister? 2010, Tanitoluwa Adewumi, Nigerian-American chess player. He was 8 when he won the 2019 K3 New York State Chess Championship. Wow. Next is September 4th. 476 CE, the fall of Rome. Led by the Germanic soldier Odoacer, the Roman army revolted against Emperor Romulus Augustus and overthrew him, bringing an end to the Western Roman Empire. 1886, end of a long struggle. Apache leader Geronimo finally surrendered to U.S. military forces after a 30-year-long battle to protect the homelands of the Apache people. He had gained a fearsome reputation for being able to repel invasions of Apache land. And in 2018, ruby slippers. The FBI announced that they had recovered the ruby red shoes worn by the character Dorothy in the film The Wizard of Oz. The shoes had been stolen from the Judy Garland Museum in Minnesota in 2005. Also on this day, in 1957, the governor of Arkansas ordered the Arkansas National Guard to prevent a group of 9 Black American students from attending Little Rock High School. In 1998, the founders of Google officially listed the search engine as a company. And in 2002, Kelly Clarkson from Texas won the first season of the singing contest American Idol. She went on to become a best-selling artist. And born this day in 1913, Kenzo Tange, Japanese architect. He was known for combining traditional Japanese architectural styles with the modernism of the 20th century. Next is September 5th, 2014, fiery stunt. South African stuntsman Enrico Schumann and Andre de Kock drove through a 395-foot-long tunnel of fire in Paris, South Africa, setting a death-defying world record. 1885, gas pump. U.S. inventor Sylvanus Bowser sold a new device for dispensing kerosene, which is a type of fuel, to a grocery store owner in Fort Wayne, Indiana. By 1905, after cars began to be built, it had been converted into a gasoline pump. 2007, going to space. Yi So-yeon was selected for a South Korean space mission, beating more than 36,000 applicants. After completing her training, she set off in 2008 on board a Soyuz spacecraft to become the first Korean astronaut in space. Also on this day in 1882, In the U.S.'s first Labor Day parade, 10,000 workers marched from City Hall to Union Square in New York City. 1972, at the Olympic Games in Munich, Germany, Palestinian terrorists took 9 members of the Israeli team hostage. And in 1991, the Indigenous and Tribal Peoples Convention, an international treaty defending the rights of these marginalized groups, came into force. And born this day, in 1847, Jesse James, U.S. criminal. He robbed several banks and trains, becoming a legendary outlaw. And in 1946, Freddie Mercury, British rock singer and songwriter. Known for his powerful voice, he found fame as the lead vocalist of the rock band Queen. Next is September 6th, 1593, Pirate Queen. Queen Elizabeth I of England met Grace O'Malley, the Irish pirate queen, and agreed to release her son from an English prison if she stopped attacking English vessels off Ireland. 1776, first submarine attack. During the American Revolution, a submarine called Turtle set out to attack the British ship HMS Eagle in New York Harbor, but failed in its mission. In 1522, sailing home, the ship Victoria returned to Spain after completing the first round-the-world trip in search of a western sea route to the Spice Islands of India. Also on this day in 1620, a group of English families set sail on the Mayflower from Plymouth, England, on a voyage across the Atlantic Ocean to set up a new colony in North America. In 1916, the world's first supermarket, Piggly Wiggly, opened in Memphis, Tennessee. And in 1997, a huge crowd of more than 1 million people lined the streets of London, UK, during the funeral of Diana, Princess of Wales. Born this day in 1860, Jane Addams, U.S. social reformer. She was the first U.S. woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize for promoting international peace. And in 1972, Idris Elba, British actor. He has starred in many action and animation films. Next is September 7th. In 1695, Pirates Ahoy! Notorious English pirate Henry Long Ben Every raided the Ganges-e-Sawai, the Mughal flagship loaded with treasures on its way to Surat, India. Every and his crew looted items equivalent to millions of pounds in today's currency and were never heard from again. 1822, Emperor of Brazil. Defying the decision of Portugal's parliament, Portuguese Prince Dom Pedro supported Brazil's desire for freedom and declared the country independent of Portugal. Pedro would become Brazil's emperor. Brazilians celebrate this date as their Independence Day. And in 1940, the Blitz begins. During the early years of World War II, the Luftwaffe, or German Air Force, began swift and targeted bombing of major cities in the UK, including London, Liverpool, and Portsmouth. The attack was called the Blitz, short for Blitzkrieg, the German word for lightning war. Also on this day, in 1812, French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte's army defeated Russian forces in the bloody Battle of Borodino in Russia. And in 1923, the International Criminal Police Organization, commonly known as Interpol, was founded in Vienna, Austria. It is the world's largest police organization and serves as a link between police departments around the world. Born this day in 1943, Gloria Gaynor, Black American singer, one of the most prominent singers of the disco era. She's known for many hits, including the classic I Will Survive. Next is September 8th, 1966, Star Trek. The first episode of the science fiction TV show Star Trek aired on U.S. television. The show ran for only 3 seasons, but grew in popularity in the following years, leading to several spin-off shows and films. 2013 Sporting Champion. After winning the women's singles at the 2013 U.S. Open, Black American tennis player Serena Williams became the world's highest-earning sportswoman, with prize money totaling more than $50 million US. This was her 17th career Grand Slam title. And 1916, Riding for a Cause. Sisters Augusta and Adeline Van Buren completed a 5,500-mile ride across the U.S. on their motorcycles to promote the idea that women could be employed as military riders during the ongoing World War I. Also on this day in 1504, the Statue of David, a masterpiece by Michelangelo, was unveiled outside the Palazzo Vecchio in Florence, Italy. And in 2020, the world's first lightsaber, resembling the fictional weapon from the Star Wars series, was created by Canada's Hacksmith Industries. And born this day in 1979, Alicia Beth Moore, U.S. singer and songwriter, known by her stage name Pink, she has sold more than 90 million records worldwide. Next is September 9th. 2018 legendary moment. U.S. singer John Legend won an Emmy Award to become the first Black American entertainer to achieve the celebrated EGOT, wins at the Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony Awards. 2009 Dubai Metro. The first urban rail system in the Arabian Peninsula was launched in Dubai, UAE. Its first train ran through the city's business district. And in the year 1000, the Battle of Svolder. A combined fleet, which included Danish and Swedish ships, ambushed the warships of Norway's King Olaf Tryggvason in the Baltic Sea. The battle that followed was the largest naval conflict of the Viking Age and ended in Norway's defeat. Also on this day in 1739, the Stono Rebellion, one of the largest uprisings of enslaved people in the British American colonies, began in South Carolina. In 1940, U.S. researcher George Stibitz, who coined the term digital, demonstrated his new invention, the electrical digital computer. And in 1945, the Second Sino-Japanese War ended, with Japan's surrender to China at 9 a.m. on this date, the 9th day of the 9th month of this year. The Chinese character for 9 means long-lasting. Japan hoped the peace between the nations would last forever. And born this day in 1969, Shane Warne, Australian cricketer. He was the first bowler to take 700 wickets in Test match cricket. Next is September 10th. In 2008, colliding particles. Scientists at CERN in Geneva, Switzerland, switched on the Large Hadron Collider for the first time. It is the world's largest particle accelerator, a machine that makes high-energy particles collide with one another so that scientists can study the fundamental forces of the universe. 210 BCE, first emperor Qin Shi Huang, an emperor of the Qin dynasty and the first ruler of a united China, died. He had assumed the title of first emperor after his army had defeated all other warring states. And in 1946, Mother Teresa. On a train ride in India from Kolkata to Darjeeling, Albanian Catholic nun Mother Teresa decided to devote her life to helping the poor and sick. Also on this day, in 1960, Ethiopian marathon runner Abebe Bikila became the first African athlete to win gold in the Olympic Games. And in 1984, British geneticist Alec Jeffreys discovered that DNA can be used to identify a person. His techniques helped develop forensic science. And born this day in 1852, Alice Brown Davis, Indigenous American leader. She was the first female chief of the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma. Next is September 11th. In 2001, the 9/11 attacks. In the deadliest terror attack on record, members of the terrorist group Al-Qaeda hijacked U.S. passenger planes, crashing 2 of them into the World Trade Center's Twin Towers in New York City, a third one into the Pentagon, and a 4th in Pennsylvania. Nearly 3,000 people were killed and around 25,000 suffered serious injuries. And in 1942, Famous Five. British author Enid Blyton published Five on a Treasure Island, the first book in her Famous Five series. These books, featuring the adventures of 4 children and their dog, would go on to sell more than 100 million copies. Also on this day in 1297, Scottish forces led by William Wallace and Andrew Moray defeated a larger English army during the First War of Scottish Independence. In 1903, the Milwaukee Mile, a motor racetrack in Wisconsin, held its first automobile race. And in 1973, military officers led by General Augusto Pinochet seized control of Chile from the elected government, establishing a military dictatorship that lasted for 17 years. And born this day in 1945, Franz Beckenbauer, German soccer player. One of the best players in history, he helped Germany win the FIFA World Cup in 1974 as a player, and in 1990 as the team manager. Next is September 12th, 1992, Black astronaut. Mae Jemison became the first Black American woman to travel to space when she was selected to be part of NASA's 7-person crew for the Space Shuttle Endeavour. 1940, accidental discovery. While looking for hidden treasure in Montignac, France, a group of teenagers found a series of caves, now known as Lascaux, with ancient paintings on their walls. These paintings are nearly 17,000 years old. And in 490 BCE, first marathon. After the first Persian invasion of Greece, the invaders were defeated at the Battle of Marathon. The best runner in the Greek camp, Pheidippides, ran 26 miles from Marathon to Athens non-stop to deliver news of the victory. This run gave the modern-day marathon its name. Also on this day in 1942, a German submarine sank the British ship RMS Laconia during World War II, killing more than 1,400 people. In 2010, Tony Gonzalez became the first player in the National Football League to catch 1,000 passes in the light end position. And in 2017, a 280-foot-long mass of solidified oil, grease, and plastics, nicknamed a fatberg, was found blocking an underground sewer in London, UK. Ew. Born this day. In 1931, Ian Holm, British actor. Starting out in theater, he went on to star in many films, including The Lord of the Rings. And in 1957, Hans Zimmer, German film score producer. One of the best-known composers in film, he has written music for more than 150 movies, including The Lion King, one of my favorites. Next is September 13th, 1898, photographic patent. The patent for camera film on celluloid rolls was given to U.S. priest Hannibal Goodwin. This flexible, transparent film would later be used in movie-making machines. In 1848, shocking accident. U.S. construction worker Phineas Gage was speared in the head by a metal rod in a workplace accident. Though Gage survived, his personality changed so dramatically afterward that he became a case study for doctors researching the human brain. And in 2016, turtle conservation. More than 200 royal turtles arrived at the Koh Kong Reptile Conservation Center in Cambodia as part of a breeding program to increase their numbers. The species is almost extinct in the wild. Also on this day in 1940, during World War II, Italy invaded Egypt with the aim of expanding the Italian Empire, but it was defeated by the British. In 1993, ministers from Israel and Palestine signed a peace agreement at the White House following decades of conflict. And in 2004, U.S. talk show host Oprah Winfrey gave away 276 new Pontiac G6 cars to her studio audience. You get a car, you get a car, you get a car. Born this day in 1857, Milton S. Hershey, U.S. chocolatier. He began his career in a candy shop before setting up his own hugely successful company selling milk chocolate bars. And in 1916, Roald Dahl, British author. He ranks among the world's most popular writers, selling more than 250 million copies of his books, which include Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Next is September 14th. 1939, American Chopper. The first helicopter with rotor blades to successfully fly took off in Connecticut. Invented and flown by Russian-American aircraft engineer Igor Sikorsky, the pioneering VS-300 design was tethered to the ground for its first flight. 1975, Maori March. With the support of 50 followers, Maori leader Weena Cooper began the Maori Land March on the North Island of New Zealand to protest against the sale of Maori land. Thousands of people joined Cooper during the month-long march to Parliament in Wellington. In 2019, Golden Toilet. I remember this. Thieves stole a fully functioning 18-karat solid gold toilet from Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire, UK. Named America, the unique object was part of an art exhibition where visitors were each allowed 3 minutes to use the extravagant toilet. Also on this day, in 786, Harun al-Rashid took charge as ruler of the Abbasid Caliphate, an Islamic empire that stretched across South Asia, North Africa, and Spain. His reign is considered the start of the Islamic Golden Age. And in 1814, inspired by the War of 1812, U.S. lawyer Francis Scott Key wrote a poem which later became the Star-Spangled Banner, the national anthem of the United States. And born this day in 1973 is Nasir bin Oludara Jones, Black American rapper and songwriter. Known by his stage name Nas, he sold more than 25 million records. Next is September 15th, 1960, tank flight. Again, the Battle of Flers-Courcelette in France during World War I was the first conflict. Oh, it says tank fight, not flight. Tank fight was the first conflict in which tanks were used. British forces deployed 49 Mark I tanks in the fight against German forces. 1983, Achoo. British schoolgirl Donna Griffiths finally stopped sneezing after 2 years and 246 days. Her epic sneezing session saw her sneeze about 1 million times in the first year alone. Poor girl, that sounds horrible. I hate sneezing. And in 1830, Intercity Railroad. Crowds watched the official opening of the steam-powered Liverpool and Manchester Railway, built to carry raw materials, goods, and passengers between the two cities. It was the world's first intercity railroad. Also on this day, in 1821, the Act of Independence of Central America made Guatemala, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Costa Rica, and Honduras independent of Spain. In 1935, the Nuremberg Laws were introduced by the Nazi Party, stripping German Jews of citizenship and taking away their rights. And born this day in 1890, Agatha Christie, British crime author. She is the creator of the famous fictional detectives Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple. And in 1984, Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, and member of the British royal family. The second son of Prince Charles and Princess Diana, he served in the British Army in Afghanistan. Next is September 16th, 1835, Galapagos trip. British naturalist Charles Darwin arrived at the Galapagos Islands near South America to study the local plants and animals. He found that the tortoises there looked different depending on which island they lived, an observation that later led him to formulate his theory of evolution. In 1810, Cry of Dolores. Mexican priest Miguel Hidalgo asked the people of his parish in Dolores, Mexico, to fight against Spanish rule. His rallying call became known as Grito de Dolores, meaning Cry of Dolores, and it triggered Mexico's War of Independence. And in 1979, balloon escape. Against all odds, 2 families escaped the communist regime in East Germany using a homemade hot air balloon. They flew over the border in the middle of the night and landed safely in West Germany. Also on this day in 1400, Welsh, Owen Glendower was announced as the Prince of Wales, making the start of the Welsh Revolt, which tried to end English rule in Wales. 1963, Malaysia was created by the merging of Malaya, Sabah, Sarawak, and Singapore. And in 1976, Armenian hero Shavarsh Karapetyan saved 20 people when he swam down to the bottom of Yerevan Lake, Armenia, after a bus fell into the water. That's an incredible story. Born this day in 1948, Julia Donaldson, British author. Her rhyming children's stories introduced popular characters such as the Gruffalo and Stickman. And in 1992, Nick Jonas, U.S. singer and actor. A member of the pop band The Jonas Brothers, he has also found success as a solo artist. Next is September 17th. 1631, Swedish victory. At the First Battle of Breitenfeld in Germany, Swedish king and military mastermind Gustavus Adolphus defeated the Holy Roman Emperor and his army. It was the first Protestant win during the 30 Years' War, a period of religious conflict in Europe. 1916, Red Baron. German pilot Manfred von Richthofen shot down a British fighter plane over France, winning his first aerial combat. Nicknamed the Red Baron, the Flying Ace went on to win 80 dogfights during World War I. And in 1787, new Constitution. The U.S. Constitution, detailing the nation's laws and principles, was signed by representatives from 12 states in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This date is now remembered in the U.S. as Constitution Day. Also on this day in 1683, Dutch scientist Antony van Leeuwenhoek wrote to the Royal Society in London, UK, describing tiny animalcules, later understood to be the first microorganisms ever observed. And in 1978, the Camp David Accords were signed by the U.S. President, Egyptian President, and Israeli Prime Minister to bring peace to the Middle East. And born this day in 1960, Kevin Clash, U.S. puppeteer. He provided the voice and actions for the furry red monster Elmo on the U.S. TV show Sesame Street. Next is September 18th, 1960, Paralympic Games. In Rome, Italy, 400 disabled athletes from 23 countries gathered to compete in 8 sports, including basketball and archery, at the 9th Stoke Mandeville Games, now recognized as the first Paralympic Games. 324 CE, Constantine the Great. After defeating his rival Licinius at the Battle of Chrysopolis, Constantine I became emperor of the Roman Empire. He built a new capital city called Constantinople, which is modern-day Istanbul, Turkey, which flourished for centuries. And in 1793, Capitol cornerstone. George Washington, the first president of the U.S., laid the foundation stone of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. I did not know that. That's so cool. It took nearly a century to complete. It is now where the House of Representatives and Senate meet. Also on this day in 1850, the U.S. Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act, requiring escaped enslaved people to be returned to their enslavers if captured. In 1980, Cuban astronaut Arnaldo Tamayo Mendez became the first Latin American person to go into space. And in 2020, archaeologists found ancient footprints in Saudi Arabia's Nafud Desert and dated them as 120,000 years old, providing the earliest evidence of humans in the Arabian Peninsula. And born this day in 1976, Ronaldo, Brazilian soccer player. One of the greatest strikers of all time, he was awarded FIFA Player of the Year 3 times. Not Cristiano Ronaldo, just Ronaldo. Next is September 19th. 1783, balloon experiment. A sheep, a rooster, and a duck took to the skies in the first hot air balloon flight to carry living things. Launched by French aviators Joseph and Jacques Montgolfier, the balloon floated in the air for about 8 minutes before landing safely. 1946, Council of Europe. Following World War II, Winston Churchill gave a speech in Zurich, Switzerland, calling for Europe to unite. It set off a series of events that, in 1949, led to the formation of a council to promote unity, democracy, and human rights throughout the continent. And in 2000, unlikely winner. Despite being the lowest-ranked swimmer at the Sydney Olympics, Eric Musambani of Equatorial Guinea won his qualifying event for the 100-meter freestyle when his fellow competitors were disqualified for false starts. Well, also on this day, in 1893, a new electoral act was signed into law in New Zealand, making it the first country in the world to allow women voting rights for parliamentary elections. In 1940, Polish officer Witold Pilecki allowed himself to be captured and held at Auschwitz concentration camp to uncover information about the conditions inside. And in 1991, the frozen body of a prehistoric human now called Otzi the Iceman was discovered in the Ötztal Alps. Born this day in 1965, Sunita Williams, U.S. astronaut. On her first 2 missions, she spent 322 days in space and made 7 spacewalks. Next is September 20th. 2014, He for She. British actor and UN Women Goodwill Ambassador Emma Watson delivered an inspiring speech to give a public face to the He for She campaign, which encourages men and boys to join the fight for gender equality for women. 1973, King vs. Riggs. In a famous tennis match, top women's singles player Billie Jean King beat Bobby Riggs, a former #1 men's singles player who had claimed he could defeat any female player. And in 2019, Polar Expedition. The German ship Polarstern set sail from Norway with a team of researchers from 20 countries for the Mosaic expedition. The goal was to stay trapped in the polar ice and drift across the Arctic Ocean for a year to study the impact of climate change. Also on this day in 1857, the army of the East India Company recaptured Delhi, suppressing the Indian Rebellion, the first major uprising against British colonial rule. In 2001, following the 9/11 terrorist attacks in the U.S., President George W. Bush announced a war on terror. And in 2019, ahead of the UN Summit on Climate Change, about 4 million people, led by school children, took part in a global climate strike. Born this day in 1932, Sophia Loren, Italian actor. She starred in many Italian and Hollywood films. It was the first to win an Oscar for Best Actress for a non-English film. Next is September 21st, 1937, The Hobbit. British fantasy writer J.R.R. Tolkien's novel The Hobbit was published. It introduced readers to Middle-earth and Bilbo Baggins' quest for treasure guarded by the dragon Smaug. 1912, incredible stunt. Hungarian-American illusionist Harry Houdini first performed his Chinese water torture cell stunt in Berlin, Germany. To the astonishment of those watching, he escaped a water tank after being lowered into it upside down with his feet locked. And in 1898, Empress Dowager. Chinese Emperor Guangxu's adoptive mother, the Empress Dowager Cixi, opposed the 100 Days of Reform, which sought to modernize China. She imprisoned him and took charge of the Qing dynasty. Also on this day in 1522, the New Testament of the Bible was translated from Latin into German by German reformer Martin Luther, making it more accessible. In 1792, the French Legislative Assembly voted to abolish the monarchy 1 year after most of King Louis XVI's powers had been taken away. And in 2018, Japan became the first country to land robots on an asteroid. These tiny rovers took pictures to send back to Earth. Born this day in 1979, Chris Gayle, West Indian cricketer. He was the first to score centuries in all 3 forms of the game. Next is September 22nd. 1762, Russian coronation. After seizing power from her husband, Catherine II was crowned Empress of Russia at a grand ceremony in Moscow. Catherine the Great ruled for 34 years, expanding her empire so that it became the largest in the world. 1968, Abu Simbel. A UNESCO-led team of engineers completed reassembling the massive Abu Simbel Temple in Egypt. It was raised 210 feet above the original location to save it from the waters of the human-made Lake Nasser. In 2000, World Car-Free Day. To draw attention to the impact of cars on the environment, people in more than 700 cities across the world cycled, walked, or took public transportation instead of driving their cars on the first World Car-Free Day. Also on this day in 1948, U.S. pilot Gale Halvorsen made his first flight to drop bundles of candy in tiny parachutes made from handkerchiefs over West Berlin after being given permission by the U.S. Air Force. Packages were meant for children affected by the Berlin blockade that had been put in place by the Soviet Union. And in 1991, photographs of the Dead Sea Scrolls, religious manuscripts dating to biblical times, were made public for the first time. And born this day in 1791, Michael Faraday, British scientist. he discovered how electrical currents could be created using magnets and invented the electric motor. Next is September 23rd, 2018, Sign Language Day. Following a request by the World Federation of the Deaf, the United Nations declared this date the International Day of Sign Languages, recognizing the need to preserve languages used by the deaf to communicate. 1846, discovering Neptune. German astronomer Johann Gottfried Galle spotted Neptune using a telescope at the Berlin Observatory in Berlin, Germany. He had used mathematical calculations made by French astronomer Urbain Jean-Joseph Leverrier and British astronomer John Couch Adams to locate the planet. And in 1889, Nintendo founded. Entrepreneur Fusajiro Yamauchi founded a company called Nintendo in Kyoto, Japan. It began by producing playing cards for the Japanese game Hanafuda, but eventually became a computer game giant, creating some of the world's most successful video games, such as Super Mario. Also on this day in 1338, the first naval battle using artillery was fought between an English ship and a French fleet during the 100 Years' War. 1884, U.S. inventor Herman Hollerith filed a patent for a machine that could process data long before the first computer was invented. Wow, 1884. 2000, with his win in Sydney, Australia, British athlete Steve Redgrave became the first rower to win a gold medal in 5 consecutive Olympic Games. Born this day in 1930, Ray Charles, Black American singer and musician. After being blinded in childhood, he turned to music and went on to pioneer soul music in the U.S. Next is September 24th, 1957, Little Rock 9. We get the conclusion to the story that we mentioned a little earlier. In Arkansas, after racial segregation had been prohibited by the U.S. Supreme Court, U.S. Army soldiers stepped in to protect 9 Black American students who were being prevented from attending the previously white-only Little Rock High School by a white mob. 1974, Test of Endurance. The first modern-day triathlon was held in California. Contestants ran 5.3 miles, then cycled for 5 miles, and finally swam 1,800 feet in the Pacific Ocean to complete the race. And in 1906, the first national monument. U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt declared Devil's Tower, a 5,112-foot tall igneous rock formation in Wyoming, as the first U.S. national monument, now protected by the U.S. National Park Service. Also on this day in 1852, a steam-powered airship built by French engineer Henri Giffard took its first flight from Paris to Elincourt, France, traveling 17 miles at a speed of 6 miles per hour. In 1948, Japanese industrialist Soichiro Honda founded the Honda Motor Company. And in 2014, India's Mangalyaan space probe entered orbit around Mars after a 298-day journey, making India the first country in the world to achieve this feat on its first attempt. And born this day in 1936, Jim Henson, U.S. puppeteer and filmmaker. He created the popular TV puppet characters called the Muppets, including Kermit the Frog, Miss Piggy, and Cookie Monster. Next is September 25th, 2020, Scanning Faces. The government of Singapore announced plans to begin using facial recognition software to verify the identities of its citizens. A little scary. 1790, Peking Opera. 4 opera troupes from China's Anhui province performed a style of musical theater called Hui Opera for the 80th birthday of the Qianlong Emperor, the fifth ruler of the Qin dynasty. It developed to become Peking opera, which combines music, speech, dance, and acrobatics performed by costumed actors. In 2000, sprinting record. At the Sydney Olympics, Indigenous Australian sprinter Kathy Freeman raced to victory in the 400-meter final in 49.11 seconds, becoming the first Indigenous Australian to win an Olympic gold medal in an individual sport. Also on this day, in 1956, the world's first transatlantic telephone call via cable was made between North America and the UK, over 2,226 miles of deep sea cable laid at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. And in 2016, the world's largest radio telescope, called FAST, began operating in Guizhou, China. Its reflector dish, which is as large as 30 soccer pitches, is used to search for signs of alien life in outer space. Born this day in 1968, Will Smith, Black American actor and rapper. He found fame in the TV series The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air before starring in a string of action and drama films. Next is September 26th, 2008, aerial feat. Dropping from an aircraft above Calais, France, Swiss pilot Yves Rossi used one of his inventions, a set of carbon fiber wings powered by 4 jet engines, to fly 22 miles across the English Channel, landing in the British town of Dover. 2009, bottle ban. Stores in the town of Bundanoon, Australia, stopped selling bottled water, making the town the first place in the world to enforce a ban on plastic bottles, which harmed the environment. In 2018, feathered giants. A research paper in the Royal Society Open Science Journal confirmed that the elephant birds of Madagascar were the largest birds ever to have lived. These flightless birds, which died out more than 1,000 years ago, were 10 feet in height, 3 meters. Holy moly. Also on this day in 1887, U.S. journalist Nellie Bly entered an asylum as an undercover patient to reveal the harsh treatment of people suffering from mental illnesses. In 1905, German-born U.S. physicist Albert Einstein published a research paper introducing his theory of special relativity, which is concerned with the nature of space and time. And in 1969, Abbey Road, the final studio album recorded by the British band The Beatles, was released. And born this day in 1981, Serena Williams, Black American tennis player. She has won 23 women's singles Grand Slams, the second highest number of titles in tennis history. Next is September 27th, 1922, 3D cinema. The Power of Love, the world's first 3D film, premiered at the Ambassador Hotel Theater in Los Angeles, California. Special glasses with one red lens and one green one enabled the audience to see in 3D. 2008, Walking in Space. Taikonaut, which is a Chinese astronaut. I didn't know that. Taikonaut Jai Shigang became the first person from China to perform a spacewalk. He was the commander of the spacecraft Shenzhou 7, which was the third Chinese human spaceflight mission. He's holding a little Chinese flag. The 1937 extinct tiger. The Balinese tiger was declared extinct when the last living member of its species, an adult female, was killed in Bali, Indonesia. The reasons for it dying out were excessive hunting and the loss of its forest habitat due to human activities. Also on this day in 1825, the Stockton and Darlington Railway, the world's first public railroad system with steam engines, opened to the public in England. In 1940, Germany, Italy, and Japan signed the Tripartite Pact, forming the World War II alliance called the Axis Powers. And in 1962, U.S. conservationist Rachel Carson published Silent Spring. The book highlighted the environmental damage caused by pesticides. And born this day in 1972, Gwyneth Paltrow, U.S. actor. She won an Oscar for Best Actress in 1999 and has played the role of Pepper Potts in several Marvel films. Next is September 28th, 1924, World Flight. 4 U.S. Army Air Service aircraft returned to Seattle after completing the first flight around the globe. The mission was accomplished in 175 days, with the crew braving extreme weather conditions along the way. 1538, Fierce Warrior. At the Battle of Preveza, Turkish Admiral Hayreddin Barbarossa commanded a victorious fleet, defending the Ottoman Empire against Christian forces. Also known as Redbeard, he was feared throughout the Mediterranean. And in 1928, making antibiotics. When Scottish scientist Alexander Fleming noticed a type of mold-killing bacteria in a petri dish, he realized he could use it for medical purposes. He called the substance it produced penicillin, which became the first antibiotic. Also on this day in 1889, the length of a meter was officially established by the General Conference on Weights and Measures in France. 2008, Formula One hosted its first ever night race at the Singapore Grand Prix. And in 2018, the melting of ice caps in the Arctic Ocean made it possible for a container ship, the Venta Maersk, to pass through Arctic waters for the first time. And born this day in 551 BCE, Confucius, Chinese philosopher. A celebrated thinker, he set up schools to teach young scholars, and his teachings became to be known as Confucianism. Next is September 29th, 1513, Seeing the Pacific. While hunting for gold in South America, Spanish explorer Vasco Núñez de Balboa crossed a strip of land called the Isthmus of Panama on foot and became the first European to see the Pacific Ocean. He claimed it for Spain, calling it the South Sea. In 1829, Bobby's Peelers. Dressed in blue suits and top hats, the first police officers in the world took to the streets of London, UK, after British politician Robert Peel launched his crime-fighting team, the Metropolitan Police Force. Also on this day in 1916, U.S. oil tycoon John D. Rockefeller became the first ever U.S. dollar billionaire. 2004, asteroid 4179 Toutatis passed by Earth at a distance of about 961,000 miles, just 4 times the distance between Earth and the Moon. And in 2020, scientists discovered 3 underground lakes on Mars using radar on the orbiting Mars Express spacecraft. They think these lakes must be very salty because salt prevents water from freezing at low temperatures. Born this day in 1758, Horatio Nelson, British Navy commander. He led his ships to victory in a number of battles, most notably in the Battle of Trafalgar against France and Spain. And lastly, we have September 30th, 2004, Sea Monster. A rare gigantic squid known as Architeuthis was photographed in its natural habitat for the first time by scientists in Tokyo, Japan. 1520, Suleiman the Magnificent. Suleiman I began his reign as Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, which was ruled from what is now Turkey. A notable leader in 16th century Europe, he promoted the development of the arts, architecture, and law in his vast dominion. In 1968, Boeing 747. The first jumbo jet was revealed to the public in Washington, kickstarting a new era in commercial air travel. with a tail as high as a 6-story building and a wing area bigger than a basketball court. The Boeing 747 was the largest airliner of all time. Also on this day in 1935, the Boulder Dam, the largest concrete structure in the world at the time, was dedicated in the U.S. by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. In 1949, the Berlin airlift ended after 15 months. This military operation during the Cold War saw U.S. and British troops delivering rations to the needy citizens in Soviet-surrounded West Berlin, Germany. And in 1960, The Flintstones, an animated TV show set in the Stone Age, premiered in the U.S. And born this day in 1980 is Martina Hingis, a Swiss tennis player. She competed in her first tournament at the age of 4 and has won more than 90 Women's Tennis Association titles. Right, and that is it for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video relaxing and educational. I will pick this up again next month. Have a very good